Hey, what's going on, everyone? Don and Ellie here. Thank you once again for checking me out and joining me on my channel here today. So, as you've noticed, the last few uploads I've been doing have been what I've been calling genre rundowns, where I take a look at a special genre and do a little bit of a history on the genre, do a little hit the major films and movements and stuff like that that's going on in the genre. So for today, we're going to be taking a look at zombie films. Now, this is one of the reasons why I've kind of kept this one kept from doing this one. Because it's my all-time favorite subgenre of horror. I'm a huge zombie fanatic, but this is one of the more complicated and more difficult genres to do like a brief rundown on. Just because there's so many out there, and it's sort of taken on sort of all these like various different sub genres that doing like a proper rundown in these kind of videos that I've been doing, it's not necessarily all that. Well, let's just say it's one of those cases where it'll take a lot longer than what I'm willing to go through. So I'll try to get through this as briefly as I can. So at the beginning, we have to take a look at the very first film, would be 1932's White Zombie. Now, this one here, we have to be a little bit more mindful and careful of all of these, terms like zombies and quotes and stuff like that. Just because it's not what we think of when we say the term zombie. When we think of zombie, we'll think of something we'll mention in just a little bit later from now. But initially, the main thing to think of when we think of zombie is mindless, brainless, indestructible slaves. And that's sort of what we get with White Zombie, because at the point, it's sort of taking a lot more influence from Haitian and Caribbean culture, where the zombie is an actual term that's used. I'm not going to go too deeply into this just because there's other people out there that are going to do this far better than me. But like I said, real quickly, zombie is basically, like I said, a person who is like mindless, directionless, just like an obedient servant, like a slave. And that's sort of where, it's not necessarily like, an undead person. It's not necessarily so much like, a centuries-old being that's come back from the dead to, eat human flesh and stuff like that, like what we think of with zombies. This is a lot more like a real-world kind of a situation where it's, grounded. They're slaves essentially, and that's sort of like what we get with the film, where it's a woman who goes to check out this claim, this heritage claim that she has on this remote island, and comes into contact with the greedy developer on the other side of the island who's looking to muscle in on the territory, and he controls an army of zombies to do his bidding and clear the fields and work a lot cheaper than it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's essentially what we get with the film, where it's not an army of undead just here to rip humans to pieces. It's it's slaves. And that's sort of like what we get with a lot of the earlier films in the style. Not only with White Zombie, but early films like Revolt of the Zombie or Revenge of the Zombie, or there's like another early 40s quickie film that I'm trying to think of. I Walked with a Zombie. That's the one. Yeah. Brain fart for a second there. But all of these films pretty much deal a lot more in terms of slave, like the slave labor using voodoo and local mysticism in the Caribbean, or like specifically Haiti and areas like that, where they take the person and they put them under a group of spells, and they put them under various different rituals and black magic, and they turn this person into a mindless, brainless being. And that's sort of what we get here with those films in particular, where that's sort of where a lot of the early zombie work comes from. Um, there's a couple of other early zombie films, again to mention a film called Zombies of Moratau. Um, I wish I had the film with me at the moment, but it's supposedly a film that's being released by Arrow Video quite shortly in this box set that I wish I had, because it sounds really interesting from the description that they said. Something about a group of divers looking to recoup a lost treasure, and coming across a platoon of zombies that sunk with the treasure and are now guarding it eternally. So for a 50s film, the description says 1957. So for a 50s film like that, it sounds pretty interesting. And then the only other film, the other early zombie film to mention would be Hammer's Plague of the Zombies, which again transplants voodoo mysticism and black magic, and puts them into a scenario involving a woman investigating a strange claim of bodies rising from the grave in the small village out in the English countryside. So it's kind of like a weird mixture of like gothic horror and voodoo and black magic and stuff like that. But again, all of these films pretty much revolve around the concept of using these rituals and mysticism and turning their victims into slaves. And usually what happens is, once the person holding them under their spell is defeated or killed, then they're released from their grips and their spells, and they return to their normal lives. So that's sort of where like the early part of the zombie history comes from. And it's not until 1968, like I said, this is where we start to get the modern day influence of the creatures, with Night of the Living Dead, which I'm not gonna go deeply on here again. There's, like I said, people far better at this than me. But yeah, it's ground zero with what we've come to think of as zombies. It's pretty much, yeah, I don't have to explain it much further. People rise up from the dead and attack humans, and eat them for food and sustenance and whatever. It's initially, it's not necessarily zombies. They were initially referred to as ghouls, but they've been co-opted since into featuring the term zombie, because so many people, so many films since, too many to mention. Films ranging from Romero's follow-up films in Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead, or flip them around, whatever. I just always say Day, just because I always say Day for some reason first, even though Dawn came first. I for some reason I just always say Day. But Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Return of the Living Dead, films like that. I can mention hundreds of thousands of titles. Or not necessarily hundreds of thousands, but like thousands of titles. You get the meaning. But it all started from Night of the Living Dead, involving the dead coming back to life and attacking and eating people. So from there, we'll rather instead look at all of these other films, because like I said, I can mention titles from here to eternity. Just rather mention a few other titles, just to go like around the world and show like what the rest of the world was doing, because Unfortunately, a lot of the early work in the genre is pretty much contained to North America. Even though like a lot of the films mentioned were American, a couple of the other titles do merit mention just by proximity. One of which is actually a really interesting title, not necessarily for how good the film is because it's really not, but just an idea of just like what was being done with the genre initially. Would be a Mexican film called Invasion of the Dead, and it's basically Night of the Living Dead with a masked wrestler playing the role of Ben. So yeah, that one's a pretty interesting film. It's not necessarily it's not a full on shot for shot, beat for beat rip, but it's pretty heavily influenced, and it takes a lot of cues and stuff from that. But beyond that, there's a few other early European films to mention. You take a look at Spain, that produced a few, starting with Mando de Osorio's The Blind Dead quadrilogy. Basically, these are known as the Knights Templar films. There are four films featuring the zombified remains of Knights Templars who were actual beings. They're known throughout history. You can look them up. They're not necessarily they're not like this made up invention. They're an actual figure. They're actual figures from history. But they're each of the films they're kind of similar in a sense, in they each involve these the zombified Knights Templars rising from the grave and attacking people, but all of them are done in this really weird, they're this really sort of like obscure technique where they're slowed down to appear as almost as though it's like a frame malfunction with the DVD or Blu-ray or whatever like disc you're using. It almost looks like there's like a malfunction with the playback speed, but it's actually part of the film, to where they're sort of either charging or galloping, and I do mean the term galloping because they have a habit of riding after victims on a zombified horseback. So not only are they zombies, but their horses are as well. And it's a pretty interesting visual. It's really cool, and the films are a lot of fun. There's four of them. Tombs of the Blind Dead, Return of the Evil Dead, and they used that term instead of Blind Dead. I have no idea why. It started before the Sam Raimi film, so it's not as if that was sort of a play on the, generate extra tickets by, naming something to appear as though a sequel. No, this was back when it was originally released in 72, 73. I can't remember, but yeah, it was always called Return of the Evil Dead. The third film is called The Ghost Galleon, and the fourth one is Night of the Seagulls, which you'll have to watch the film to know the reasoning for that. But there are a couple of other Spanish titles. The other big prominent one would be The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, also known as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. This is another one that's another really heavy Night of the Living Dead sort of influenced film. Basically, with this one, a supersonic wave being tested to control airborne pests in this this farm industrial area, ends up reviving local corpses buried underground and sending them on a rampage. But police inspective investigating the crimes doesn't believe them that they're zombies. He believes this couple that's going around that just gets stuck in the middle of everything and sort of tries to corral them instead of the zombies. A really good film. I really like it, and it's kind of like an under the radar kind of an effort. I remember reading that there was a remake of some sort. I want to say either Taiwan or South Korea. I'm not sure, but there was a I remember reading there was a remake in like the early '80s of Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. It's supposedly really good, but uh, I don't know too much more about it. I want to say the name is something like a monstrous corpse or of a grotesque corpse or something like that. I think that's the translation of the title. Like I said, it's either Taiwanese or South Korean. Um, uh, but yeah, that one there in particular is a remake of Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. So um, it is, there's some sort of a, influence. You can see that around the world. But the other Spanish film to mention is Graveyard of the Dead, which obviously, there's a lot of, you know, I can't say much about that one because I haven't seen it, but I think from the title and the fact that all of these, the three I mentioned, especially the first of the Blind Dead films, Tombs of the Blind Dead, Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, and Graveyard of the Dead, they all came out like roughly within like a year of each other, so they're all kind of like bunched together kind of closely. Um, but the other one to really mention in terms of European zombie films would be, obviously the Italian stuff. Fulci's Zombie, Umberto Lenzi's Nightmare City. Again, Fulci's follow-up, The Beyonds, or not just The Beyond, but City of the Living Dead as well. You can also put that in there with the zombie films, but other films like Zombie Holocaust and Burial Grounds, even more of a adult spin on things, and I mean that literally, with Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, which unfortunately is not a porn parody of Night of the Living Dead, despite the title. It would almost probably be more of a porn parody with I Walked with a Zombie with Night of the Living Dead zombies style. Um, it's pretty wild. Not gonna say too much because this is a family-friendly channel, but yeah, the Italian stuff in the late '70s, early '80s, probably I would, a huge part of my fascination with zombies. A lot of my favorite films from there. Even a couple of other cash-ins like Jean Roland's Zombie Lake and Jess Franco's Oasis of the Zombies, which are both French films, but they always seem to get lumped in with those zombie, with the Italian zombie stuff. But yeah, all of those are generally really good. Probably, if you were to look at stuff like that, I would probably recommend any of the Fulci three. Probably would say Zombie would be the best of them, but you can't go wrong with any of those three. If you can't find it, then Nightmare City is a good substitute. Only in other thing to mention with that one is that Nightmare City tends to use what would be the first of the running zombies, which is one of the big deals within the zombie community, whether you like the shuffling or whether you like the running zombies, where they're not necessarily like what had come before with Night of the Living Dead. They were sort of shambling, shuffleless, just slow moving, really really easy to move around, kind of it almost seemed as though like the rigor mortis had set in and it made it like impossible for them to like really move without like it was like it took like a lot of effort for them to move very very little. So it was a lot easier for like a warm-blooded person to like move around them in like a small group, but it was more, you had 50, 60 of them together that you had to outmaneuver, so, you were just like overwhelmed by the numbers, which was how a lot of the films at that point had sort of evolved into. Nightmare City takes the approach of them being acrobatic sprinters. They use tools, they use brain power, they lure people into traps. Yeah, it's sort of like they've termed them running zombies just because They actually literally run after people instead of just shuffling slowly after them. A couple of other films have taken on it. Return of the Living Dead played with the style. 28 Days Later, its follow up 28 Weeks Later, and the Dawn of the Dead remake sort of used that prototype to a greater effect, I would say. A lot more. They evolved them into like a lot more sprinters, faster speeds, a lot more just kinetic kind of energy towards attacking their prey. So it's kind of it's like the secondary thing where you have like the traditionalists that prefer the brain deads, the slow moving stuff. If you want like the faster, more acrobatic stuff, then you have like the secondary subset of films to look into. But other than that, the only other real thing to mention, again, there's not a lot I can really speak on in this matter, but I can mention that when Asia tends to do the zombie films, outside of that one particular Night of the Sleeping Corpses Lie remake, a lot of the Asian stuff, it tends, when they evolve zombies, they tend to go for the wild, wacky, and just like outrageous stuff. So, especially, Japan and Hong Kong, they tended to really just go all out with bizarre, wacky, just absolutely ludicrous stuff. I can name stuff like Battlefield Baseball, which is an actual title. That's a legitimate movie. Battlefield Baseball, Tokyo Zombie, Hell Driver, or my all-time favorite, not just because it's a good film, but just because the title to this thing is just so wacky and bizarre. Zombie Ass Toilet of the Dead. Yeah. That's the again, that's another legitimate film. That's just sort of like the idea of where they're coming from. But all of this is like the more modern, like recent stuff, like post 2000s. Pretty much like 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, Day of the Dead, not Day of the Dead, the Dawn of the Dead remake. All of the Asian zombie stuff. All of that's post 2000s. Just real quickly, just because I can tell I'm kind of like getting on just with that. A couple of the other big scenes to mention with zombie comedies, not just with a lot of rip-offs of a film called Shaun of the Dead from the UK, which is sort of become like a really beloved, popular title. Again, I'm not going to mention too much about it, but there's a lot of films that have taken inspiration from that. The loser that just, is forced to grow up and, take charge of the situation based on a zombie apocalypse. It's been done a lot. A lot of comedies have taken that route. Again, too many to mention, but real quickly, just also want to mention, a couple of other big titles that have come out. Basically, the TV show Walking Dead. I'm not necessarily a huge fan just because it's not necessarily where I go to with zombies, but you have Walking Dead. You also have the underrated show Z Nation, which I actually kind of liked. I thought that one was a little underrated. It was a bit more comedy with the zombies. But I always kind of like that show. And then the two zombie series on, I think they're Netflix. Black Summer, which was really good. And the Asian series Kingdom, which, reminds me to mention one of the, the most heralded films in the genre, Train to Busan. I know a lot of people tend to really point to that one as like one of the big resurgent points of the genre, and for good reason. Probably I would say a top 5 film all time, not just in terms of Asian horror, but like all-time zombie films. Yeah, Train to Busan is definitely worthwhile and engaging. Definitely worth your time. But yeah, there's so many to mention that it's probably I would say best to just cut it off here, just because it's gonna take too long and it's gonna be just far more involved than what I'm willing to do for one of these videos to just do like a rundown on the genre. So, if you're interested in that, in more, you can check out works below. I'll link a couple of other. I'll link my website, donshorrorworld.blogspot.com, where I do a lot of zombie films on there. Like I said, it's one of my favorite subgenres, so there's a lot of stuff on there. But also, there's another article just to dig deeper into. Fuck that. So, yeah, other than that, I guess we'll, talk to you guys next time. And, thanks for checking out my video.